Welcome to Colloquial Language, brought to you by NHS England South West. In daily life and in a variety of contexts throughout the UK, people use language which is regarded as colloquial or spoken English language expressions. It's the use of words and phrases that are not usually found written down in formal context, but arise when an individual is trying to express a concept. A wide range of figurative utterances are regularly heard on a daily basis in the UK when people are speaking in English. There are many different sorts of figurative speech, including idioms, irony, metaphors, similes, sarcasm, and euphemisms. There are hundreds of idioms, so let's consider a small selection. To do something at the drop of a hat means to do it instantaneously. Somebody who's described as like the wind is someone who acts very quickly. To miss the boat means to miss an opportunity. So, for example, a person might say, you wouldn't want to miss the boat with that application, which means get the application in straight away or you'll miss the deadline. Hold your horses comes from the days when a person would travel on a coach and horses, and to hold the horses would mean that the speed was slowed down. So when you say to somebody, hold your horses, it means not so quick, just slow down a little bit, do something a little bit more slowly. To give something a run for its money means to offer something suitable competition. So this will give him a run for his money means, this will give somebody a bit of a challenge. To do something by the skin of your teeth means that you've had a narrow escape. When a person isn't present at a meeting or a gathering for some reason and somebody asks where they are and the person says, oh, they've got bigger fish to fry, it means they must have got something a bit more important to do, and that's why they're not there. If you don't want to do something and you've been putting it off and a person says, oh, you'll just have to bite the bullet, it means to get on and do it even though you don't feel it very desirable. It's a bit unpleasant. If you're barking up the wrong tree, it means that you might be pursuing the wrong course of action or that you've got the wrong idea about something. Another similar idiom is to get the wrong end of the stick. It means that you've got an idea but you haven't quite got the right idea about what's happening. Maybe to change perspective. To get a taste of your own medicine is to have an experience of being the way that you've treated others. So if you've been treating other people a little bit unfairly, for example, or you've been a bit aggressive towards people, and then somebody is aggressive towards you or treats you in the same way, then a person might say, oh, they've got a taste of their own medicine. To get something straight from the horse's mouth means that you get the message directly from the source rather than listening to hearsay or to rumours about it. You go to the person who sent out the message in the first place and you find out exactly what the true message is. An elephant in the room is a problem that nobody wants to talk about. So when people are talking about an issue and they're coming up with all kinds of related issues, but they're not getting down to the bottom of the business, people talk about, we're not talking about the elephant in the room, the big issue that nobody really wants to tackle. To see which way the wind blowing, that's obviously from sailing. It's to find out what the popular opinion is. So sometimes when a person is asked to vote on an issue, if they're not very keen on making a decision between two things, they might find out what people are saying about it first on social media, for example, and then they might vote the way that the popular opinion is seeming to go. Often people use idiomatic language when referring to their health. So a person might say something like, oh, I'm feeling a bit off colour, or I'm feeling a bit out of sorts, which is a generic term for not feeling very well, but not really sure what exactly it is that is wrong with you or what's causing the issue. Touch and go is an example of a phrase that somebody might use to describe a situation where they weren't really sure whether there was going to be a positive or a negative outcome. So they might say, oh, it was touch and go for a while. It was touch and go. When somebody's living on borrowed time, it means that they're in poor health, so they haven't got much time left. To pull through, however, means to recover from something. So if you say, oh, I think she's going to pull through, then it means hopefully that eventually they'll turn a corner and they'll start to recover at some point, even though they're not very, very well at all at the moment. Under the weather means that you're feeling less than in perfect health. Again, it's a little bit like feeling out of sorts, for example. Feeling full of beans, on the other hand, means that you're active and very well. Oh, she's full of beans today. That means that somebody seems to be feeling really well, seem to be recovering very well. To give something the benefit of the doubt means, at the moment, don't make any malicious judgments. Take something as being of good intention, of good intent. To have a lot on your plate at the moment means that you're very, very busy. So when you say to somebody, I haven't got round to it yet because I've had a lot on my plate recently, it means that you've just had lots and lots of competing priorities. To have too many irons in the fire is a similar thing, really, that you've taken on lots of responsibilities. It comes from the days when there were lots of people who worked as blacksmiths in a smithy, and they would put an iron in the fire before they were shaping the iron into a horseshoe, for example, or into a fancy piece of metalwork for a gate or something like that. But obviously if you've got too many irons in the fire, then you're struggling to get each iron out and shape it into something worthwhile. And so if you're taking on too many responsibilities, then you might say, oh, I've had too many irons in the fire, or she's got too many irons in the fire. That's the issue. It's a problem of not being able to say no to things, unfortunately. There's something about that in the time management podcast if you want to listen to it. Bent over backwards means I do as much as possible to make things happen. So if you say to somebody, well, I've bent over backwards to help them, and they're still not happy, it means that there isn't very much more you could have done really to help to make something come to fruition. Burning the candle at both ends obviously comes from a day when we used to light rooms at night and in the early morning using a candle before there was electricity. But if you burn the candle at both ends, you end up with no candle left, obviously. So if you're getting up very early and you're going to bed past midnight, you're not getting enough sleep. Burying your head in the sand comes from the activity that you can sometimes see in an ostrich that tends to just stick its head in the sand if it's frightened of something, rather than running away, because then it can't see the danger or the threat around it. So if you stick your head in the sand or you bury your head in the sand, it means that you're not really acknowledging that something's happening, that you have to confront, putting it off for another day. And struggling to make ends meet, if somebody comes to a consultation and says, oh, we've been struggling to make ends meet, you probably hear this quite a lot at the current moment if you're listening to this in 2023. It means having money worries. We were struggling to make ends meet, or we're struggling to make ends meet. It's often a contributor towards stress and illness relating to that. They were driving me round the bend, or they were driving me up the wall, or sometimes they were driving me nuts, people say, is when someone's making you feel very annoyed. They flew off the handle at me. It means they lost their temper. If something is going round and round fast enough, then sometimes it will fly off its axis and fly away, basically. So that's when somebody loses their temper, to fly off the handle. We've already discussed miss the boat, so I won't look at that one again. So over the moon actually means that you're very, very happy about something. So if you get promoted, for example, or you hear some really good news that you've wanted to hear for a while, then you might say, oh, I'm absolutely over the moon about it. And sometimes people say, I'm made up, or she was made up about it. A simile, as a different type of figurative language, takes the structure as something as a, or like something, and are normally used to compare one thing to another thing, to conjure up a certain image. So there's loads and loads of similes you will hear in common parlance, but a few examples include to sparkle like diamonds. This is often used when referring to a person's eyes. So their eyes sparkled like diamonds. It indicates an impression of someone looking healthy and alert. As useful as a chocolate fire guard, almost speaks for itself. It's often used when a person feels that something wasn't very helpful, because a fire guard that was made of chocolate would just melt, obviously. Like watching paint dry refers to an activity that was extremely boring. So if you were waiting for paint to dry and you were watching it at the same time, you would be very, very bored, because it takes a very long time and it isn't very interesting because you can't really see it happening. She slept like a log, or he slept like a log, or I've slept like a log. A log is very still and it never moves, of course, because it's extremely heavy. So sleeping like a log suggests that you've slept very heavily, because you generally don't move as much when you're sleeping very well. As dull as a doorknob. Well, a doorknob does have a purpose, but it's not a very interesting object as such, because it just turns round and round, but you can't really see it turning because it's round. It's not very obvious when you're turning it. So it would indicate that something was very drab. As blind as a bat is something that you might often hear from people. It's a commonly held opinion that bats can't see at all, and they use sonar to help them to navigate. So being as blind as a bat would mean that you had no sight at all, rather than being partially sighted. People say this even when they don't really mean that they can't see anything at all, but they're not very good at spotting details or being aware of what's in front of them. They say, oh, I didn't see it, I'm as blind as a bat. Or I'm as blind as a bat without my glasses, sometimes people say. Euphemism is defined as a mild or indirect word or expression, substitute for one considered to be too harsh or blunt, when referring to something unpleasant or embarrassing. The words derive from the Greek you, well, and pheni, to speak, and was first used in the English language as long ago as the 16th century. In the context of healthcare, the use of euphemisms is discouraged, really, although patients will often use euphemisms, as they've had the potential to distort the meaning of sensitive issues that require further discussion. However, a euphemism can be used at times to communicate with the patient such that their understanding of the condition increases and their experience is less stressful. Furthermore, patients will sometimes use euphemisms to describe how they're feeling. When choosing the language for a sensitive healthcare conversation, a healthcare professional will need to balance their openness and clarity in communication with consideration of the patient's experience and level of distress. So some examples of euphemisms are to powder your nose instead of to go to the toilet. So when a person says, I'm just going to powder my nose, they're not really going to powder their nose, they're going to the toilet. It's a way of excusing yourself for a comfort break. Similarly, to visit the ladies' room is another way of saying, I'm just going to the toilet. It's the same as the first one, really. Sometimes people say to the little boys' room as well. A person might say tinkle instead of saying to urinate. People often feel uncomfortable about talking about the toilet, so they use alternative expressions such as tinkle. So I don't know, going to pass water or to urinate. When I go for a tinkle, they say, instead of when I go to urinate, or sometimes people say go for a wee. They'll often sometimes refer to problems or issues with the waterworks. When they come to a consultation, rather than talking about urinating, they'll say, I've got problems with my waterworks, doctor. A person might refer to that time of the month instead of saying that they're menstruating. So a person might say, oh, I don't know why I'm feeling like this. I think it's the time of the month. Or I don't know why she's behaving like this. I think it might be the time of the month or that time of the month. People often talk about getting the sniffles instead of stating that they've got a runny nose. They'll say, oh, I've had the sniffles recently. There are a few euphemisms for aging, but one of these is to reach one's golden years instead of being in old age. If something's not very impressive, a person might report that it left a lot to be desired, rather than saying it was very disappointing. When a person's intolerant of other people and comes across as a bit aggressive, it's not unusual to hear people refer to them as not suffering fools gladly. So when you don't know somebody and somebody asks you about them, you might say, oh, I hear that they don't suffer fools gladly. There are a range of euphemistic expressions for talking about death, but a commonly heard one is they've lost their wife or they've lost their husband. It doesn't mean that they can't find them, it means that they've actually died. Sometimes you'll hear that a person has passed away or passed on. Also, a person who's died is sometimes referred to as late, such as my late father. Metaphors take a person or object and change it into other things. Hence the words metaphor for metamorphosis, which means to change from one thing to another. A rose by any other name means an object's called a few different things, but it's recognised as exactly the same. Sometimes also say I've called a spade, which basically means whatever you are talking about, it's the actual thing. You're not trying to go around the houses and use euphemistic language. You get straight to the point. A shot across the bows is what you say to warn someone that bad or unexpected news is coming. A house of cards is an argument that has no foundations. Cards tend to be blown down into a heap quite easily. We're talking about playing cards here. Sometimes people, when they're bored, they make a little house or a pyramid out of a stack of cards. But as soon as somebody opens the door, it blows away. So the house of cards is blown down. So this is used to refer to an argument. It's, oh, it was a house of cards. To batten down the hatches, this signifies that trouble is ahead. It comes from the days when people were in the trenches during World War I, and when trouble was coming, there was fire ahead, and they were likely to get fired on. Then they battened down the hatches to protect themselves, stop hand grenades from being thrown into the trenches and blowing them up. Don't shoot the messenger. You hear this quite a bit, actually, especially at the moment where you hear lots of government messages about things. This refers to the fact that the person telling you the news hasn't made the decision themselves, and it asks you not to blame them or treat them harshly for simply conveying a message on behalf of somebody else, the decision maker. A loose cannon, somebody who's not very discreet, a cannon that breaks loose will shoot all over the place, and it can be unpredictable and it will be quite dangerous to be around. So a bit of a loose cannon means, oh, it's a person who speaks the mind and doesn't really think about the impact on other people of the things that they're saying, or doesn't keep things to themselves that might cause a slight problem if other people know about it at that particular time. Standing on the shoulders of giants, you sometimes hear this used when a person claims that they're using an idea that was originally thought of by somebody else and they're building on that concept. But then they're claiming the credit for that idea. Sometimes when people publish research, it's an original piece of research, but they've actually taken an idea that somebody else conducted some research on earlier on, and they've modified that slightly and built upon it, but then they often don't give credit to the original idea. A rose by any other name, well, we've already, I think, spoken about that, so we don't really need to come back to that. Proverbs can be based on actual events or can be figurative or literal, and they take the form of short, pithy sayings that sum up a situation. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. This is often used when there's a team and everyone has to make an effort, but the strength of the effort relies on each team member and can be reduced if one of them is not powerful enough. A journey of 1,000 miles, it begins with the first step. When overcoming procrastination, this saying's useful in reminding yourself to start with the first step and just build from there. A drowning man will clutch at a straw. Clutching at straws happens when it's difficult to find an explanation for something happening, and even the smallest bit of evidence is cited, even though it might be somewhat insignificant or unreliable. Appearances can be deceptive. Another one of these sayings is, never judge a book by its cover. It means don't make assumptions about an individual or a situation before you've heard them speak and seen them in action. A ship in the harbour is safe, but that is not what a ship is for. This refers to the fact that we have to take risks in life to make achievements. We can always stay within our comfort zone, but this will eventually limit our ability to fulfil our true potential. A thing begun is half done is similar to a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. Once you commit to a task and you make a proper start, it's much easier to make progress towards completing it. You reap what you sow. If you sow harmony, you'll generally see that it's returned, but sowing discord will often lead to unpleasantness that will rebound on you at some point. Similarly, if you put in hard work, then you'll get the outcome that you want. If you don't put any hard work, then it might lead to failure at some point. Every man is the architect of his destiny. This is a powerful saying that claims that whatever you want to do, you can do it if you put your mind to it and you plan properly. Fall 7 times, stand up 8 is about resilience, and this requires no real explanation. It's self-explanatory. With sarcasm, people say the opposite of what they actually mean when they're being sarcastic, to demonstrate disdain for another person. So, for example, they might say, I can see that you're really on top of things, in a certain tone of voice that shows that they don't really believe this, to show they've noticed that the person is not managing their time very effectively. With irony, a little bit like sarcasm, this often comes across in one-word utterances. So, for example, a person might say one thing but mean the opposite. So they might say, oh, fine, but it doesn't mean fine at all. It means they're not happy with this. Similarly, a person might say, great. This often used to say, this is not really what I wanted, or charming, which is a bit like great. Or sometimes a person might look at something quite gruesome and very unpleasant and say, lovely, which is a symbol that actually they don't think it's lovely at all. They actually mean the exact opposite to that. We've come to the end of colloquial language, but if you'd like to read more, there are some links to follow above. Thank you for listening.